I have decided to participate in the Short Stack Readathon in January, and today I will be going over my very ambitious TBR for that readathon. This is a readathon hosted by Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly and Kara from Wild Book Garden. I will have both of their channels linked in the description. You can go see their announcement videos for this readathon. This is basically a readathon to read short books in January to kind of kickstart our reading goals in 2024. This readathon also has a bingo, which I will be using for my TBR to help guide my TBR. You can use one book for more than one square on the bingo, and you don't need to fill out the entire bingo, just getting a few bingo rows, which honestly, I'm gonna say my goal is kind of to get like 2 bingos during January, but I've decided to find books for every single prompt. There are a handful of prompts that I struggled finding books for. So if you have any suggestions for short books to read in January, let me know. And I definitely have more books on this TBR than I could possibly read in January. So if I mention one that you really want me to get to or that you've really enjoyed, let me know that as well. Their recommendation for what counts as a short book is something 250 pages or shorter. However, that is a suggestion. You can kind of determine for yourself what you classify as a short book. Most of the books on my TBR or my pile of possibilities are under 250 pages. There are a handful that I sneaked on there that are more than that, but I am going to justify them by saying that these are going to be very quick reads. They're going to be books that I think I can get through rather quickly, and because of that, I'm going to count it as a short book. I would love to say that I'm going to be making readathon vlogs throughout January. I am definitely doing a readathon wrap-up video, but my schedule might be changing in January, and I don't want to commit to anything when I'm not sure how much time I'll have to film and edit videos. So next video, I might be just a readathon wrap-up, but if I have time, I'll try to do a vlog maybe mid-January. And with that, let's get into my January TBR. I am buddy reading the book A Spear Cuts Through Water in January, and that book is over 500 pages, so there's absolutely no way that I can justify that as a short read for the Short Stack Readathon. But I am still reading it in January. Other than that, everything that I'm going to be mentioning will fall into the Short Stack Readathon. The first bingo square is to read a novella, and pretty much half of the books that I mention that I want to read in January are novellas. Now, I am also planning on buddy reading another series in January. I am reading a few of the Murderbot books. So I am reading Fugitive Telemetry. I have already read that one, but I'm going to reread it for the January buddy read, and then read Network Effect and System Collapse. So Fugitive Telemetry is kind of what I have in mind for the novella square on the bingo. Next square is to read a short story, and there is a couple Murderbot short stories on the Tor website. I am planning on reading the short story Home, Habitat, Range, Niche, Territory from the Tor website and then counting that as my short story for the bingo. The next bingo prompt is poetry, and I don't read poetry, so I have no idea what to fill in here. Kelly mentioned in her video that you can read a single poem or you can read a collection of poems. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'm just gonna kind of look up what are popular, famous poems and then read one of those. The next bingo square is comics, graphic novels, mangas, which is another square that I really struggled with. This is not a format that I typically read. It is absolutely a valid form of reading. It's just not a format that I've really been able to get into. I did have a couple books, a couple graphic novels that I've been considering reading that are on my TBR, so maybe this will be an excuse to actually get around to them. The first one is Allergic. I believe this is like a middle grade graphic novel about allergies, or at least introducing that concept or dealing with it. I don't really remember. I have it on my TBR because I was interested in it. And then Flamer, which I don't really remember what that story's about, but it was one that I was interested in reading that was on my TBR, so there we have it. The next bingo prompt is a short novel, and I definitely have several that I could fit in the category of short novel. The first one being System Collapse. This is 245 pages. It is one of the Murderbot novels, but like the Murderbot novels are typically on like the short side, but it's not one of the novellas either. This one's actually shorter than Network Effect, which is why I included that. I also have a few middle grade books that I feel like fit short novel, but maybe that's cheating because they are meant for younger readers. So the first one is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. This will be a reread for me. Murphy mentioned in her video that this was her Patreon pick for January, and I kind of want to read it because she's reading it and then, you know, see what her thoughts, because I'm sure she'll be doing vlogs or videos on it. This is one of those stories that's kind of like a blend between like dark and cozy fantasy, and it's this coming of age story where a baking wizard whose magic is good at baked goods ends up getting caught up in a murder investigation and a coup against the kingdom. So I had a lot of fun with it and I look forward to rereading it. The next one is The Griffin's Egg. This is a new book that is being released in January. I believe this is a little bit more of a classic fantasy. I know there's probably like an animal companion and there's goblins in it. It sounds really fun. That one is right around 200 pages, so I think that definitely fits as a short novel. And the other one I was thinking about reading is Deadlands Hunted. This is a series I've had my eye on for a little bit. This is a middle grade dinosaur book, but it's compared to Wings of Fire, and I've really enjoyed my time with Wings of Fire. This one is about 300 pages, which I think definitely counts as a short novel. And I'm assuming this one would be a pretty quick read given that it's middle grade. So I'm sneaking it on here as part of my short Stack Readathon list because honestly, this is short for fantasy books that I typically read. The next bingo square is continuous series, and any of the Murderbot books that I read would be a series continuation for me. So that definitely fits for this prompt as well. I have a few others that could also fit for this prompt. So I was considering reading Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot series, and the second one, The Prayer for the Crown Shy, would also fit for this prompt, but I do have to read the first book before I read this one, so that does require I read two books, but the first book fits some of the prompts later in this bingo. So I might be reading that series this January. And the other one for continuing a series that I could read is Throne of Jade. So I have been wanting to reread the Temeraire series. This is a series that I read years ago. It's one of the first adult fantasy series that I read and I absolutely love it. And I've been wanting to make videos around this series and I've been wanting to reread them. These are full-length novel length, but they're right around like 350 pages. And I listened to the audiobooks last year, at least the first few of them, and I got through the audiobooks really quickly. So even though these are more than 250 pages, they're short for fantasy books, and I feel like they read very quickly. So that's why I'm including them on Short Stack Readathon. The next bingo square is Fits a Goal, and I have several that I could include for this square. So I also have several like e-arcs or advanced reader copies from NetGalley right now that I need to be reading. So one of my goals is to read all of my NetGalley e-arcs. The first one I have is a January release. This is right around 200 pages. It is called The Tusks of Extinction. This is, I think it's these scientists decide to bring woolly mammoths back. And then of course, problems, whatever. I'm interested in reading that one. The Griffin's Egg is also right around 200 pages, and I also have the e-arc for it. I also have a book called The Sunlit Ruins. I believe this is like sort of comparable to like the Percy Jackson books, except this is Aztec gods. It sounds interesting. I'm excited to read it. This one is a little bit longer. It's like 350-ish pages, but I'm hoping that it'll be a pretty quick read and I'll be able to include it for the Short Stack Readathon. And the last e-arc that I have is The Dead Cattail Assassins. I am super excited for this book. This one's right around 220 pages, and it is basically about these undead assassins. And they have this code that they have to follow, and of course something happens in the story where our main character is considering breaking the code or, I guess, questioning the code. I don't know. I'm really intrigued. Another book series I could include for Fits a Goal is the Temeraire series, so His Majesty's Dragon and Throne of Jade, because I've been meaning to read these and make videos on this series. That is a goal that I have for 2024. The next bingo square is previous TBR. So these are books that I've previously said I'm going to read these and then just never got around to. So I was going to read all of the Murderbot books in 2023, and that's definitely not happening at this point. So any of the Murderbot books that I read next year is books that were previously on my TBR. The Temeraire books, I also was planning to do that this year, and for several months I was like, this is going to be the month that I do that, and I've just never actually started. So that's a previous TBR book. A Psalm for the Wild Built, that is the first book in the Monk and Robot series, and I've had this book on my TBR many times. I've been meaning to read this for so long, basically since it came out. And the last book that I have on previous TBR is The Deep. I believe this is like a dark mermaid story, which has been on my TBR for like literally years at this point. So this readathon would be an excellent time to actually get around to it. The next bingo square is a 2023 release, and I only have 3 books that are 2023 releases. So that is System Collapse, which is a Murderbot book, The Mimicking of Known Successes. This is a sci-fi detective story as far as I know, and I've kind of had my eye on this one for a little bit, and I'm excited to read it. Also, The Sunlit Ruins, which is like the Aztec gods story, is a 2023 release. So I could read any of those for this prompt. The next prompt is Longest on TBR, which is not the longest in number of pages, but the book that has been on my TBR the longest, which you might have been able to tell from a previous prompt. The Deep and A Psalm for the Wild Built have both been on my TBR for years at this point. I really should read them in 2023, so this would be a really good readathon to read them in. The next bingo square is a trope that you love, and honestly, I'm not going to put a specific book for this. I have a lot of speculative fiction, a lot of fantasy on my TBR that I could read, and I like a lot of fantasy tropes and a lot of speculative fiction tropes. So I'm going to assume at least one of them is going to have a trope that I love, and I can use that to fill out the square. Also, if I'm only aiming for like 2 bingos in January, I might not even need to fill out this square. So we'll see. The next bingo square is a friend recommended, and I'm going to include the Murderbot books for these. So the reason I read these is basically because of people reading them and recommending them on Bookstagram, and I kind of did a read along for the first several on Instagram last year, and then I was reading them also with other friends in Discord, and I'm going to be buddy reading them again. So I feel like any of the Murderbot books count as my friend Rex. Well, no. You're not allowed to do that. Also, we're like 18 minutes into this and I'm not far enough. The next bingo prompt is favorite genre, which basically I can include any of these. Fantasy is my favorite genre, and very many of these were fantasy books. The next prompt is birthday month cover. My birthday is in August. The gemstone for my birthday is green, and then my birthday is in the summertime. So I'm going to say anything that the cover looks green or summery. So one of those books is the Deadlands. This has like green growth on it, and there's like green dinosaurs on it. This cover seems summery to me. So I think that works. And then also Throne of Jade, I think works for this prompt as well, just because of the green cover. And I believe part of this book takes place in the summer, although this book does take place over like many months. The next prompt is nonfiction, which is also one of the prompts that I struggled a little bit to find a book that fits. But I am currently reading The Georgian Star. This is a nonfiction book about William and Caroline Herschel and their discoveries in astronomy. This book is about 170 pages, and I thought that I was going to read it entirely this year, but it's probably going to be a book that I carry over to next year, so I might allow that to count for this prompt. Other books that I would consider for this prompt is Astrophysics for People in a Hurry and The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. So if you've read either of those and recommend them, let me know in the comments. Next prompt is speculative fiction, which is like almost everything that I have listed so far. So any of the books can count for this prompt. The next prompt is romance, which is one that I really struggled with. But Kelly said in her video that she was considering reading plays in January. And my library has like audio drama, audio theater versions of Shakespeare plays that I was considering listening to. So I might pick like one of his more romantic plays and listen to that and count it for the romance square on the bingo. Next prompt is historical fiction, which is another one that I actually really struggled with. Like seriously, if you have short historical fiction recommendations, let me know in the comments. I think the Temeraire books would work for this. They are historical fantasy, but they're like definitely set in this world. They're during the Napoleonic War, but with dragons. So I think that would count. I also considered doing one of the Enola Holmes books. So I did actually start reading the Enola Holmes series a couple years back, and I have been meaning to continue it. So I believe, and those are short books too. So I think that would probably count for this prompt. And the other book that might count, but I'm not quite sure, is The Order of Pure Moon Reflected in Water. So what I'm not sure about this one, I think it's like a historical fantasy, but I'm not sure if it's like set in historical Asia, but with fantasy elements, or if it's inspired by Asian history and is a fantasy book. So I'm not quite sure if that one works, but I've had my eye on this one. So like, I kind of want to read it. The next prompt is mystery thriller. So The Mimicking of Known Successes, which is like the sci-fi detective story, I think would work for this prompt. The Enola Holmes books that I just mentioned would work for this prompt. They're like historical mysteries, so that would count for like multiple prompts on this. The other book I was considering for this prompt is The Case of Windy Lake. This one, whenever I saw it, it just kind of put me in mind of the Boxcar Children. So it is a children's story that is set on the Windy Lake First Nation reservation, and it is about these children who solve mysteries. So I've kind of had my eye on this one a little bit. I'm like, I kind of want to get to that. Like, the Boxcar Children were like books that I read so many of them growing up. So it kind of seems like maybe a little bit of nostalgia, but like completely different characters in different setting. So I don't know. They just sound fun. The next prompt is 4-word title. And can you believe, of all the books I mentioned so far, only one of them has 4 words in the title, and that is The Tusks of Extinction. This is one that I have to read for January anyway, because it's one of the arcs that comes out in January and I really need to be reading it. So that fits perfectly. The next prompt is the most anticipated, and my most anticipated is The Dead Cattail Assassins. This one just sounds so perfect. It sounds so up my alley. I am so ready to read this one. The next book is New Author, and most of these are new to me authors. The only authors I've read from before are Becky Chambers, Martha Wells, Naomi Novik. Was there anyone else? The next prompt is start a series. So I can start Monk and Robot with A Song for the Wild Built, and then after I use that to complete this prompt, I can go on to A Prayer for the Crown Shy to read the continuing the series prompt. So that one works out great. I could also start The Mimicking of Known Successes, is also the start of a novella series. And if I read His Majesty's Dragon, that also counts as the start of a series. And for the final prompt, which is definitely one that I struggled with like the most, is It Feels Like Winter. And most of the books that I have on this list are speculative. And I mean, I could kind of say sometimes classic fantasy puts me in mind of winter, particularly because I rewatch the Lord of the Rings movies like every winter. So I could say that, but looking at this list, I'm like, I'm not really sure how many of them. Maybe the Griffin egg counts as classic fantasy, but I'm just like not really sure how many of them like would fit this prompt. But I am planning on trying to read some of the Magic Tree House books in Spanish. My library has them in Spanish. So I think I'm going to read Polar Bear Past Bedtime, which is where these kids travel through time and space and visit the North Pole. So that is definitely wintry to me. So there you have it, all of my many piles of possibilities for January. Let me know if you've read any of these, which ones I should prioritize, and I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading!